Folks, welcome back. As you know, we're talking a lot about Israel. I wish we weren't, but we are, because what's been going on there is out of the pit of hell. And if you don't believe in hell, let me just say, why don't you turn on the news? I have the privilege right now of sitting in the studio, TBN studio here in New York City. Ron Coleman, my guest. Ron is a lawyer, works with Harmeet Dillon. Some of you know Harmeet Dillon and is a lawyer as well with the Trump campaign. Ron Coleman, welcome.
Why, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm really glad you could come in here. If people can't see what you're wearing, it's obvious you're an Irishman.
That's right.
Yeah.
And even without the hat, people can, without the tam o' shanter, people have no trouble picking me out.
I thought it was a beret. You're not French? You are a serious Jew. There are a lot of people that are ethnically Jewish, but they don't take that very seriously. You take your Jewishness seriously. You're a lawyer. And I just want to talk to you about many things, but principally what is happening in Israel today. So where do we start? I mean, it's do you have any sense of how this happened? I know there are people wondering how is it possible that Israel's border was breached in that way?
Well, people also asked on 9/11, how is it possible? And when they don't understand, or when there's a certain sort of cognitive dissonance about something awful happening, there is a desire to come up with explanations, and then we come up with explanations that often are libelous, defamatory, and horrible. The fact is, in human events, it is always easier to destroy than to build. It is always easier to undermine than to create. And the State of Israel is an extraordinary creation that would not have been possible without God's providence and extraordinary blessings. But humans will always find ways to destroy things, especially things that make them feel inferior and make them feel that someone else has something that they don't have. And that has been a problem in that part of the country for a very long time. There is, among many Jews in particular, and many others, a myth that the Israeli military and intelligence capabilities are nearly divine themselves, and that the only way something like this could have happened is that it was allowed to happen. Why? Because the Mossad knows everything. Whatever the NSA doesn't know, the Mossad knows, and they probably both know all the same things. That's not true. Ultimately, and ask anyone who works in software, cybersecurity, hackers will always be a step ahead. It's easier to infiltrate, easier to destroy, and that's what happened here. If you don't think like a wicked person, you will never really understand the mind and the capability for wickedness that evil people have.
I mean, look, I'm saying this about China. I mean, the idea that we have an open southern border, this is sheer lunacy to the point of satanic, because evil actors, they're looking for an opening. They have nothing better to do. They live to find an opening, a way in. And if you don't think China is doing that with the United States, if you don't think, and so you have to really be aware that evil exists. There are people whose life goal is to do any number of these horrible things. And if you're not aware of that, you're a fool. And I think there's no doubt that the current occupant of the White House is a fool, and that they don't understand this kind of thing. We know Israel is not. We know that Israel has been vigilant, has understood the threats against it. But as you say, nonetheless, these horrors are possible. I know that you're a lawyer with the Trump campaign. Most Jews in New York, since I lived here most of my life, they're more kind of Bernie Sanders people than they are Trump people. But I find that theologically conservative Jews tend to be more pro-Trump than, anti-Trump.
Well, Orthodox Jewish vote went about 90+% for Trump.
Wow.
People don't recognize that. The problem is that most Orthodox Jews in the United States, politically speaking, the problem is that most Orthodox Jews in the United States live in very red states.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry,
Blue
very
states,
blue states.
like New York.
Like New York and New Jersey. The fastest growing city in America is Lakewood, New Jersey, which is the location of the gigantic yeshiva there, rabbinical, Talmudical academy, where two of my sons are studying now, and my two older sons studied in the past. It overwhelmingly went for Trump. On the other hand, local politics is always local, and Democrats continue to control a lot of things, a lot of money, a lot of programs, a lot of resources.
We're not saying they're corrupt. They are corrupt, but we're not saying it right now.
He's not saying it.
Yeah.
I'm saying it.
No, look, we have to be honest. I mean, this is why when people say, well, I don't know, you're still talking about election fraud, it's like, yes, I'm going to continue to talk about it until I'm convinced I'm wrong. I'm convinced that I'm right. And if you aren't speaking about it, you're a little bit of a coward because our nation is at stake. When you cannot trust the system, that my vote is a vote, if you don't care about that, you clearly don't care about the country.
I was in the Philadelphia Convention Center in the fall, day after the election, 2020. One of our colleagues walked in with a court order saying you've got to let these people in to observe the counting of the mail-in ballots. And the lawyer for the Philadelphia Board of Elections said, I see it's a court order and we agree that it's valid. We're not going to do it. And not only did she delay until the Philadelphia Supreme Court, which is a political organization, not a judicial one, overturned that order, when we called the sheriff of Philadelphia County to say, I've got local officials here that are ignoring a state court order, he said, that sounds terrible.
I tell you, it's just, it's great, Ron Coleman, to have you here because you have lived this, you've seen this, and there's so many people that they kind of act like, well, I don't know, that's conspiracy theory. I mean, clearly, if you're paying any attention, you say, this doesn't look good for them. It looks like they stole the election. It looks like they're corrupt. And it looks like they know how to work the system. And they know that they can get away with it. And that's why they're being brazen. That's why when you come in there with a court order, they say, yeah, thank you very much. We're not going to comply. Because they know that things are so broken and so corrupt that they will get away with it. That's the horror.
It's a horror, especially for someone such as myself, who has been practicing law for 30-something years. And you don't go into this unless you're the most cynical person in the world. And I recently was displaced from the top 10 in that. You go in with some expectation that there are standards, that there is some level of embarrassment at which people will not be brazen. And it turns out, no.
Okay, it's interesting you say this because I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't expect that you know this, but I wrote a 600-page book about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and about the rise of the Nazis. And
Everyone
so on and
knows
so forth.
that.
Okay, well, I wouldn't expect that you'd know it. But the reason I bring it up is that one of the things when I wrote that book, because my mother grew up in Germany during this period, and you always say, how did this happen? How did this happen? How is it possible this happened? What you see is something very, very similar, was that it was a nation of laws, just like we are, but more and more people would ignore the law or get away with it, or there'd be a corrupt judge. In other words, it wasn't like suddenly there's a dictator and everybody, it's not suddenly like you have Kim Jong-un is the dictator and everybody's in fear. There's still a semblance of legality and a legal system, and sometimes it works, but it slowly goes away because it becomes increasingly corrupt. And that's basically where we are in America right now. And that's what's, like you're saying, you expect, well, there's some standard.
Well, you might have expected in Weimar Germany that there were risks to the stability of their system because it was a young system. They didn't have a tradition.
That's right.
Like our Anglo-Saxon legal tradition with,
Right.
And of course, you pick the century, pick the year, you'll
Yeah.
always find some abuse.
Yeah.
But there was this overall feeling that if you ever walk into the New York City Bar Association building, there's this grandeur, the sense that we are really involved, we're dedicated here to a calling. And just what the judiciary had, and I really
Yeah.
blame the judiciary because lawyers are obligated to push. It's judges who are supposed to push back, and they just stopped.
Which is amazing. What is that, cowardice? What do we call that?
There are a lot of
Yeah,
reasons for
yeah.
it. I don't think it's so much cowardice. I think it's that's the game.
Well, I want to, before we go to the break, I want to remind people we are raising money for Israel. We need you to go to metaxastalk.com, You'll see the banner, Israel at War. We really need your help, folks. Please, metaxastalk.com. Do what you can, metaxastalk.com. Welcome back. I'm talking to Ron Coleman, a partner at the Dillon Law Group. Offices here in New York City. Ron is with us here in our Manhattan studios, talking about a lot of stuff. You're Jewish, so I want to talk to you about what's happening in Israel. Whatever thoughts you have on that.
Well, I've got a friend on social media who recently became Jewish. She converted to Judaism, Cassie Dillon. We've been internet friends for many years. And she completed the conversion process only a couple of months ago. And the massacre that took place was on the second day of the Jewish. Here it was the second day. In Israel, it was already the end of the. They don't have the 2-day festival. They have the 1 day. So we didn't. The information started to sort of bleed into our communities during that the night of the end of the first day. And Cassie was talking about. She mentioned on Twitter, here I just got on my Jewish suit, and I had such a nice holiday planned, and this is just so awful. And I responded to her, welcome to being Jewish. Now you've really made it. Now, because this is what the last 30, 40, 50 years have been the exception to the rule.
That's right.
When I woke up on Yom Kippur morning in 1973, my father had a look of terror on his face because Israel had been attacked again. And this was only a couple decades after the Holocaust, which destroyed hundreds of members of my family. This is what it is like to be Jewish in this world. This is, for some reason, and there are many, and we understand them well, but not everyone necessarily agrees with how they trend. This is part of the mission that God has given to Israel, the people Israel, in this world, which is to be the first ones, and very often the most acutely affected ones, to identify forces of evil.
It's interesting because, speaking as a Christian, it seems to me that the Christian faith has a more sophisticated or explicit understanding of evil, satanic, whatever. And whenever I talk to my Jewish friends, it doesn't seem to be as clear. And yet, I would say, when people say, why is Israel, why are evil people always trying to kill the Jews? Well, because the devil hates those whom God loves. The devil hates anyone who identifies with God, and that's going all the way back to the Garden of Eden, which is in Genesis, which I believe is in the Old Testament. Am I getting that right? But it is interesting because what we're talking about is evil. How else do you describe it?
And it is actually so evil, and I haven't really found a way to, and I'm usually good at finding ways, I haven't really found a way to explain why this particular incident, it has, to so many people, come across and hit them as a difference in type, not merely in quantity. There are people whose eyes definitely have been opened.
Oh, I mean, look, to me, it's easy. This is not, when people say somebody were killed, no, they weren't killed, they were murdered. There's a difference. There's a difference when somebody sends in a missile and people are killed. This was murder. This was deliberate, evil murder of innocents. That's different than, some tanks from Jordan or some tanks committed.
It was very personal.
It's very different when you go in and viciously murder innocents deliberately. When you take hostages, it's a completely different order of
inhumanity.
Well, yeah. So So it's dramatically more brazen. Again, it's one thing when military comes in. That's bad enough. This is the difference between the German army and the SS going into Poland. Murdering people, murdering babies. That's any human being says this is different. This is evil. That's what we're seeing right now.
There's no question about it. And someone asked me, what can Christians do? How can Christians help? And I thought about that. I mean, one thing is, certainly when I'm involved in my social media polemics, and I see a Christian standing up to defend the Jewish people and the state of Israel, which are not exactly the same thing, it makes my job a lot easier. But the harder task is for Christians to be Christian. What you do and what your guests and your community does to rebuild faith in this country and to return us to a source of, to make America a source of spiritual strength instead of weakness, that is what everyone needs. That's what the world needs for good to triumph.
I think there's no doubt about that, and I wrote a book called If You Can Keep It, where I hadn't really understood the connection, really clearly understood the connection between American freedom, self-government, and virtue and faith, and how the God of the Bible figured into that and whatever. And so many people try to say that's nonsense. It's not nonsense. Freedom comes from God. This nation has to look back to Israel, a covenant community, covenanting directly with God. And there's just no doubt the connection between freedom and faith in the God of the Bible. There's just no way around it. And we're if you don't get that, you can't possibly understand what freedom is or what tyranny is. It's all part of it. And one thing you can do, folks, to remind you again, if you want to help Israel, go to metaxastalk.com. We need you to go there. Please go to metaxastalk.com, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. We have a banner, metaxastalk.com. Please be generous. God bless you. Welcome back. Talking to Ron Coleman. And Ron, you have more followers on Twitter than I do. You are...
You've got a couple more books than I do.
Okay. All right. So we're even. We're even. We were talking a minute ago off the air about you're a lawyer for the Trump campaign. You saw clearly the stealing of the election. You were in Pennsylvania. So we're not making this up. And there's still so many people that say, well, we need to move on. How do you move on? I mean, that is amazing to me. The brazenness, the wickedness. If you love America, a lot of people don't. But if you do, how do you not care about this? I'm just fascinated.
Yeah, I also have never really quite figured it out. There are people who I was very friendly with who stopped remaining friends with me, and they were, not personally, but on social media. Because I was now an election denier, election denier.
Right.
Which, I mean, and there's this really, really toxic methodology that the left uses for coining these Holocaust denier, election denier.
Yeah.
See? Climate denier. It's so freaking cynical.
Okay, yeah. Just to be explicit, the idea that you would use the Holocaust to put forth your crummy little conspiracy theory by using the term denier, that's wicked. That's a level of cynicism. That's evil. But again, I would be happy if those people were right. Like, oh, you know what? Yeah, you were right. The election was fair. Oh. I would be the first one to say, like, America voted for Joe Biden. I believe in the law. I believe in rules. I believe in we the people get to pick the president. But every day that passes, I'm more convinced that it's true. And frankly, I think most Americans, as time passes, they're looking around, and they're saying, you know what? Yeah, it seems clear that Biden's team, not Biden, since he doesn't have the capability, that they stole the election. Who was that? Who was behind that? And if you, by the way, if you can't denounce that as evil, as wicked, as
it's a betrayal.
Anti-American as anything.
It's a betrayal of everything that we have lived for, in terms of our civic responsibilities.
Yeah.
I mean, as people of faith, We know that there's no state, no country, no nation trumps the power and authority of God. Be that as it may, as Lincoln said, America has been the
last best hope of Earth.
That's right, and it's a legit. And there's no question. It really can't. It's not a legit. That's. If you don't agree with me about that, then welcome to the Biden White House. Then fine.
Yeah.
But it is problematic, as you say, that so many institutions have bent toward that.
Yeah.
That entire trend, and look at how they manipulated the January 6th, the events of January 6th, and to no small extent caused those events to take place.
There's no doubt about it. I hope people will see the film Police State, made by my friend Dinesh D'Souza, because it gets into this stuff. But I think every single day, more and more people are waking up. The mainstream media, such as it is, the cultural elites, they are becoming increasingly a non-issue. I mean, they are becoming increasingly out of touch, and their numbers are dropping like a stone.
Well, then you're giving them a tremendous amount of benefit of the doubt there. A great number of them are in on it on some level or another.
Oh no, I didn't say that wasn't true. That's a fact. But I'm just saying, generally speaking, it's fascinating to me how more and more people, because of the looniness and the evil of the last few years, more and more people have turned to alternative sources of news and information, and they're waking up. And the mainstream media would like to pretend like, no, that's not happening. Everybody still watches NBC. I don't think so.
Not only is it, do they want to pretend it's not happening, secretly, and sometimes not so secretly, they want to stop it from happening by delegitimizing alternative. So as soon as Elon Musk bought Twitter, it became a cesspool of hatred. It became a big farm of anti-Semites. It was before, by the way. I mean, to give Jack Dorsey credit, when I first started getting involved in Twitter and I would get into Jewish conversations, I would get replies with pictures from crematoria and concentration camps. And that pretty much stopped when the first real push towards cleaning up Twitter, when it really started to explode during the Trump years. But people are more out and proud now about being secret anti-Semites. And I say secret because they're 99% of the time anonymous. They don't dare say their names and faces because they're scumbags.
Yeah. And that's the Hebrew term, folks.
It's actually Yiddish, but okay.
That's what I meant. It's really we're seeing the evilness of evil in a way that we have not, and it's coming out. It's more explicit. So Jew hatred, openly satanic stuff. We're seeing it more, and that's what's so fascinating. I mean, to see people. Keening about the Palestinians and denouncing the Jews after what just happened. I thought to myself, wow, after what just happened, how do you go there?
Well, you mentioned how you earlier that you not in our discussion, but I've heard you say that you hate Yale and Harvard equally.
Yes,
I do also.
Yeah,
because I went to Princeton, and I was disgusted this morning by an article that I saw on Twitter about faculty signatories to a pro-Hamas letter at Princeton.
Not pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas.
Basically pro-Hamas, for all practical purposes. And I wish I could say that at least there weren't any Jewish names on there.
Oh, yeah.
There were a lot of Jewish names on there.
Hey, there's a lot of self-hating Jews. Have you heard of that term?
There are also a lot of Jews who simply will not recognize the existence of evil, because recognizing evil means that you have to recognize good. Recognizing good means you have to recognize
God, which means you got to stop sleeping with your grad student, probably. No, listen, I've had these conversations with people that I said, speaking to a Jewish woman, this years ago, 20 years ago, I said, so do you believe in evil? Do you believe the Holocaust was evil? Was Hitler there? And she says, well, it was evil for him, or some nonsensical term. You think, okay, you're out of your head, lady. If you do not have the ability to see this, you can no longer have a conversation with someone like that. You said you agree 1 + 1 = 2. Well, perhaps for us now, there's no ability to believe in objective truth, because if you believe in objective truth, it leads you to God. Sorry, folks, that's where it goes. We're talking to Ron Coleman.
The fountain of objective truth.
The fount, yes, exactly. As I was going to say, Ron Coleman will be back with me. Don't go away. Talking to Ron Coleman, who is a lawyer, among other things. Ron, you've done a lot with free speech, and Harmeet Dillon, with whom you work, has done a lot on free speech. We have moved in this country from, about 40 years ago, neo-Nazis marched through Skokie, Illinois, Jewish suburb, and basically, the advocates of free speech said, yes, it's hateful, but in America, we allow it, even though it is hateful, but we allow it because we believe in free speech. That has changed. We don't really believe, the left, which used to be at the forefront of this, because they wanted to be cool and,
they wanted to say whatever they wanted.
Well, they wanted to stand up with the cool comedians, like they're speaking their minds and we shouldn't come after them and stuff. But suddenly now, when free speech means saying things that might not agree with where they're coming from, they are no longer advocates of free speech. It's a stunning thing to see it in America.
It really is. And as you point out, it was a position of convenience for the left, and their silence on corporate censorship, and even corporate censorship where the government has outsourced censorship to corporations. And Missouri versus Biden, which was just accepted by the Supreme Court to be reviewed by them, the Fifth Circuit decision that said, guess what, you can't outsource censorship, government. That's always been prohibited. And you can't say, well, it's about election security. It's about misinformation or disinformation. Doesn't matter. You're the government. You can't tell Twitter what to censor. You can't tell Facebook what to censor. Doesn't matter that they're a private company once you start leaning on them.
Well, it's kind of like George W. Bush outsourcing torture. We need to have these conversations. Before I was referencing, when it was cool on the left to be for free speech, it was kind of like about Lenny Bruce. Like, he's cool, he says this stuff, we're all for him. It's just like saying that I think we should publish Lady Chatterley's Lover and Ulysses. Like, we're all for anything like that. Then when the challenge is to things that are, let's say, it's more socially conservative or more conservative or more pro-American or whatever it is, they say, well, then not so much. We don't care about free speech if it's working in the other direction. That's called hypocrisy.
It's hypocrisy, and what's particularly disappointing is how it has affected academia, which was supposed to be where people learned how to search for truth. Not so much.
Well, I have to tell you, when I was at Yale in the early 80s, it was already dying, and it is now dead. If you think it's a good thing to send your kid to Yale or Harvard or Princeton, whatever, can I break it to you? Save the money and skip it, because those places are, petri dishes for Marxist lunacy.
And if you think, well, it's worth it anyway because my kid has a good foundation and I'm going to send him there or her there, and at least you'll get that great opportunity to work on Wall Street. No, that's even worse.
Yeah.
It gets worse.
Yeah. But but there are a lot of people that they don't want to face this reality. Honestly,
get out of the public schools.
There was
get
a
out
time.
Of the Ivy League.
There was a time a little while ago where you'd say, yeah, I'm going to send my kid to one of these schools, or I'm going to send my kid to the public schools, or I'd like to work on the New York Times someday, or I'd like to. All of these institutions are dead, and you need to understand they're dead and stop wasting your time thinking that there's something there. There's nothing there. They want to fool you into thinking there's something. They're drafting off the fumes of the past, or whatever it is. We're out of time. Ron Coleman, I'm so glad you're local, so glad you could come in here to the studio. I'd love to get you back just to continue the conversation. People can follow you at Ron Coleman on Twitter. Ron Coleman, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Folks, this is your daily reminder to please go to mypillow.com or mystore.com, and to get huge savings, use the code ERIC. If you don't believe me, here's some celebrity friends.
Mama said to use the code ERIC.
Use the code ERIC.